the news tonight, Jordan's position on Syria remains unchanged, calling for a political solution to the conflict, but is taking all necessary measures to prepare for an escalation in the event of military action. British Prime Minister David Cameron says the Parliament's vote against a strike on Syria reflects the will of the people and says he hopes US President Barack Obama understands. And the United Nations says all analysis of Syria samples by chemical experts must be completed before conclusions are drawn as the team packs to leave Damascus tomorrow. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. Position on Syria, calling for a political solution that ends the bloodshed and preserves the unity of the country, has not changed. Since the onset of the Syria crisis, His Majesty the King has warned against the repercussions of the civil war on the entire region and has repeatedly cautioned against the threat of sectarian conflict in Syria. While the US says it is ready to launch a tailored against Syria, the British Parliament has voted against a military intervention, and France says it is ready to go even without Britain's participation. What is Jordan's position on current developments? I earlier spoke with Minister of State for Media Affairs and official government spokesman Mohammed al-Momani to shed more light on Jordan's stand in the event of a military action against Syria. Your Excellency, the Syria crisis is creating chaos in the international community in what seems to be an imminent strike against the country. What could be the risk for Syria's neighbors, and how worried should we be at this time?
As far as the Jordanian government is concerned, we are taking all necessary measures, standard operating procedures in order to prepare for any escalation in the Syrian crisis. We are close to Syria geographically, so we take all necessary measures. All Jordanian institutions, military, security, civil institutions are taking the measures that should be taken at this point in order to deal with the escalation in Syria that has been debated at the international level. Our political position continues to be the same. We have a vested interest in a political process. We believe the best exit of the Syrian crisis is through political negotiation and through all Syrian factions sitting on the table to discuss their future away from violence. Our interest of a stable Syria that is able to keep its problems inside its borders.
Again, in the event of a military action against Syria, will Jordan open its borders to the refugees?
Jordan is committed to international law and international humanitarian law, and we will not close our borders of the face of any refugee seeking security and safety. And we will continue to do that, and we are preparing for any scenarios in order for us to be able, with the cooperation with the international organizations, mainly UNHCR, in order to cope of any influx of refugees.
You have called on the media to exercise neutrality, objectivity and accuracy in reporting and covering the news in Syria. What message would you give them today?
Unfortunately, over the last couple of days, we have seen some media coverage that is unprofessional and basically spreading rumors and not counting on facts. We should be, at this point, committed to professional objectivity. We should report the truth and the facts as they are. We should refrain from any adoption of any rumors that is unprofessional and unhealthy and sends wrong messages to the public opinion. We call upon all media outlets to exercise the highest level of professionalism and objectivity and to seek the truth and report the truth. Other than that, it will be constructive and it will be unprofessional. This is our message for them tonight.
Your Excellency, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ali.
U.S. President Barack Obama says the U.S. is still in the planning process for Syrian response and that his preference would have been for international community to move forward. He said part of U.S. obligation leader in the world is to make sure that when a government uses prohibited weapons that they are held to account. Obama noted that no one is more war-weary than he is, but that the U.S. must be willing to safeguard international norms. The U.S. president held briefings today for members of Congress by the administration to tamp down criticism that it has not properly consulted lawmakers. His Secretary of State, John Kerry, earlier made the broad case for limited U.S. military action against Syria, saying it could not go unpunished for what he called a crime against humanity. Kerry was speaking in a televised address to present U.S. findings about a chemical weapons attack in the suburbs of Damascus a week ago. He said the U.S. would carry out a tailored action that would not resemble the U.S. invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, nor its intervention to help topple the former Libyan leader. A U.S. intelligence report disclosed today that there is, quote, high confidence that Syrian forces have used chemical weapons multiple times in the last year, including the attack in Damascus a week ago, end quote. British Prime Minister David Cameron has lost by just 13 votes, but British observers believe his failure to win the parliamentary approval to launch military action against Syria may place a question mark over Britain's role in the world. Loud cries of resign, resign rang out from opposition Labour lawmakers before the visibly shaken Cameron told Parliament he would heed Parliament's will, saying, I get it. It was the first time a British Prime Minister had lost a vote of war since 1782, when Parliament conceded American independence by voting against further fighting to crush a colonial rebellion. Cameron's inability to determine Britain's foreign policy and join Washington and Paris in strikes against Syria is also believed to strain relations with the United States. But Cameron said he hoped U.S. President Barack Obama would understand and he had nothing to apologize for. Lai Balkar has the details.
The UK military involvement in Syria has been rolled out after MPs rejected a motion on the principle that action could be required to protect Syrian civilians. The leader of the UK Labour Party, Ed Miliband, hoped parliamentary vote against a British military strike on Syria would pave the way for further diplomatic action and that Prime Minister David Cameron's loss of the vital vote would help him sense and learn from the past mistakes.
I think the wider lesson for Britain and for Britain's leadership is that when we seek to act militarily and have the potential to do that, we must do so in a calm and measured way, working through the United Nations, working with other countries and learning lessons of the past.
British David Cameron said he regretted the failure of Parliament to support the United States in its military action, but he hoped US President Barack Obama would understand the need to listen to the wishes of the people.
I strongly believe in the need for a tough response to the use of chemical weapons, but I also believe in respecting the will of this House of Commons. It is clear to me that the British Parliament, reflecting the views of the British people, does not want to see British military action.
Britons welcomed the vote result of their parliament and said Britain shouldn't get involved in the conflict.
Why get involved with something that you really haven't got anything to do with, I suppose? Don't say I condone what they're doing, but at the end of the day, that's what it is, isn't it?
Meanwhile, Russia said the British parliamentary vote shows a growing international understanding of the risks of intervention. The Russian foreign policy advisor said he believed the vote reflected the majority opinion in Europe as a whole, not just Britain. And French President François Hollande said he remained committed to a firm response on Syria alongside the US, despite Britain's rejection of armed intervention. He said all options were on the table and did not rule out military strikes within days. US Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel reiterated that the US will continue to seek an international coalition in response to Syria's alleged use of chemical weapons, despite opposition by British lawmakers to any military action. He added that Washington will continue to consult with the British as it does with all of its allies.
Our approach is to continue to find an international coalition that will act together. And I think you're seeing a number of countries say publicly, state their position on the use of chemical weapons. We'll continue to consult with our allies and our partners and friends.
In Syria, the UK MP's vote blocking British military action is being seen as a victory by the Syrians, with one less foe to worry about. Luay Belkar for the news at 10.
And as the US and France prepare to act on Syria seeking a 15-member UN Security Council vote on a draft measure, China said there should be no rush to force action against Syria until a probe by the UN experts into suspected chemical weapons use is complete. In remarks reported by the official Chinese news agency, the foreign minister told UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon by telephone that China fully supported an independent and objective inspection free from outside pressure. The Chinese foreign minister said that taking unilateral action will only make matters harder to resolve and its legality would attract doubts. Political resolution is the only way out of the crisis, he affirmed. And in a separate conversation with his German counterpart and one with the Arab League Secretary General, the Chinese foreign minister said that whoever used chemical weapons had to accept responsibility. Meanwhile, a UN expert team has finished gathering samples and evidence related to the suspected chemical attack in suburbs near Damascus last week and is packing up to leave tomorrow. The inspectors have spent the week visiting rebel-controlled areas while the fighting continues on the ground. Farah Hajlouni has more about the investigation.
This video shows explosions rocking the same Damascus suburb where suspected chemical weapons attacks reportedly occurred a week ago. Smoke billows from between buildings in the Ghouta region as aircraft flying above can be heard. The shelling comes as the United Nations inspectors visit a government-run hospital in Damascus, where a witness mentioned that soldiers affected by chemical weapons are being held. Rebels and government forces have blamed each other for the incident that occurred on the 1st and left hundreds dead. The inspectors have spent the week visiting rebel-controlled areas on the outskirts of Damascus after reports of a poison gas attack that the opposition blames on President Bashar al-Assad, while the Syrian government accuses the rebels of firing chemical munitions at civilians and soldiers. Official media said soldiers were overcome by fumes after finding chemical agents in a tunnel that had been used by insurgents. According to the state news agency SANA, soldiers suffered from cases of suffocation. However, the investigators will be leaving Syria tomorrow, but will return later to investigate several other alleged poison gas attacks that have taken place in Syria during the country's 2.5-year-old civil war. United Nations spokesperson Martin Nisserki says analysis of the sample should not be rushed.
Beyond that, the samples that have been collected will be taken to be analysed in designated laboratories. The intention is, of course, to expedite the analysis of that the sampling that's been taken. But we have to be very clear here that the mission, before the mission can draw any conclusions about this incident, the evaluation of all available information, including the laboratory analysis of all samples, must be completed.
While results of the analysis are still to be presented, the big questions that lingers: will there be a strike on Syria without a conclusive evidence of the Syrian government's use of chemical weapons? Farah Hajlouni for the news at 10.
Over to Iraq, at least 12 people were in 2 car bomb attacks in the northern town of Tuzkormato. The second bomb went off as people were trying to help casualties of the first explosion. Iraq is experiencing its deadliest wave of violence in at least 5 years. In July, more than 1,000 people were killed in attacks, the highest monthly toll since 2008. In Cairo, hundreds of protesters marched through the streets calling for the of the elected government. The marchers defied warnings that the security forces would open fire if protests turned violent. Soldiers were joined by police at checkpoints near the protest to block access to one of the bridges over the Nile. And in Alexandria, a total of more than 10,000 protesters took part in several separate demonstrations. The health ministry said 3 people were killed and 36 wounded in various incidents. In Port Said, 1 protester was killed and 21 injured in clashes between supporters of ousted President Mohamed Morsi and his opponents. A Japanese office worker, part-time artist in the central Japanese city of Osaka has created a name for himself as a maestro in finger painting using technology. Sikuya Makawa's work is all digital and on an iPad. Because of long hours at the office and no time for traditional painting, which requires a number of tools, the solution was to start painting on the iPad, since all you need is the device and your finger. The app Yamakao uses is less than $5, but with it he's also drawn from replicas of classic masterpieces to original portraits and compositions. His skills with digital finger painting have made him something of an internet sensation, with each YouTube video showing him painting on his iPad getting over 100,000 hits every time. We begin with cycling, where Belgium's Jelle Valais won stage 1 of the World Ports Classic race, his first professional race win. He was part of a breakaway group for much of the race until he sprinted away from the rest of the riders and headed into Rotterdam on his own. Valais reached the finish line 26 seconds ahead of powerful sprinters Andre Greipel and Alessandro Petacchi. By evading his pursuers, Valais is stage winner, points winner, leading young rider and overall leader going into the second stage of the race that takes place tomorrow and runs from Notre Dame to Antwerp. Monaco was abuzz with the who's who of soccer as it hosted the draw for the group stage draw for this season's Europa League. Tottenham Hotspurs drew in the same Europa group as Russian club Anzi Makachkala. Former European champions PSV Eindhoven were drawn in Group B alongside Croatian champions Dinamo Zagreb, Ukraine's Koronomorets Odessa and Bulgaria's Ludogorets. Sevilla will face Germany's Freiburg, Portugal's Estoril and Czech side Liberec in Group H. Group and runners-up advance to the knockout stage, where they will be joined by 8 third-place teams from the Champions League group stage. The final will be held in Turin, Italy in May. And finally, normal summer conditions continue in most regions, with a slight drop in temperature expected tomorrow. Winds will be northwesterly moderate to brisk, and in the Gulf of Aqaba it continues to be hot with northerly moderate winds and calm seas. And to close, his reminder of the day's top stories. Jordan's position on Syria remains unchanged, calling for a political solution to the conflict, but is taking all necessary measures to prepare for an escalation in the event of military action. British Prime Minister David Cameron says the Parliament's vote against the strike on Syria reflects the will of the people, and says he hopes US President Barack Obama understands. And the United Nations says all analysis of Syria samples by chemical experts must be completed before conclusions are drawn, as the team packs to leave Damascus tomorrow. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Alia Tuqan. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night, and I'll see you tomorrow.